Hi, welcome to A Gray Barn Rising. I'm here this evening, of course, with Bootsy Beagle, and I'm reading the poems of the poet Alvaro Cardona-Hine. I'm really pleased to honor Alvaro and his work this evening. He's a dear friend of mine and a marvelous poet. Alvaro was born in 1926 in Costa Rica, and he moved to this country in 1939 at the age of 13. He's actually not just a poet, he's also a painter and a musical composer, and he lives with his wife Barbara, who's also a writer and a painter. They live together in Truchas, New Mexico, in the mountains on the high road between Santa Fe and Taos. Alvaro and Barbara have also practiced Zen meditation for many years, and in fact Alvaro was a sensei, a lay Zen teacher. His work is deeply influenced by the Eastern wisdom traditions, and particularly the Chinese poets of antiquity, but also this fascinating thread of Spanish surrealism enters his work as well. He was deeply affected by Federico Garcia Lorca's book Poet in New York, and he loves Cesar Vallejo, Miguel Hernandez, and poets like this who have really helped shape his consciousness. I want to mention a book of his that is not poetry, but that I would love readers to get turned on to, and this is 13 Tangos for Stravinsky. This is a book of, it's a memoir of his adolescent years in LA. Alvaro left the Los Angeles area. Well, I've got a stack of Alvaro's books here, but I'm going to read from these here, I think. The others within reach if I am so moved. He grew up in LA, left, and returned, and fell together with a group of LA poets, Tom McGrath, Gene Frumkin, Mel Weisberg, William Pillen, poets like Burt Myers, poets like this, and this was around 1957. So he was part of that LA poetry scene in the 50s, which was really a remarkable scene, is a remarkable scene. There's the book I want to start with. I want to read you this wonderful, evocative little poem from his book, Words on Paper, titled Christmas Eve. Two hobos bending over a flame in a field of inert weeds. Heaven upstairs. The little broth of a train in the distance, boiling down to nothing. And I'd like to read two or three poems from A Garden of Sound, which this book came out, I think it was in the 90s, and 1996. But these poems were really written between 1969 and 1971 at the Zendo. They are where it's oats for breakfast. Outside, the oak tree hasn't said a word the last 10 years. Rewarded with an owl. The priest is buried horizontally. The owner of the small corporation goes to the window and lets the sunlight in. Evening Raga. You have gone into the world with your weak identity shining like a badge. You stop for a meal by the roadside, sleep without permission, in a heap borrowed from the moon. I know what it is you want. The elephant in the jungle hears your cry. The white crane disappears into the mist. I think you can hear the influence of the ancient Chinese poets certainly coming in, commingling with his voice in those poems. I'd like to turn to a very early book now, which is entitled The Flesh of Utopia. This came out, I believe, in 1965. And I want to read from a very long poem. I can't read, it's the title poem, it's in sections, and it's much too long to read, but I'd like to choose some of the sections to read because each one is dedicated to someone special in Alvaro's life. And they stand independent, as independent poems really, although the entire poem itself is cumulative and beautiful. This is number 2 of this sequence, To Jean Frumpkin. And I think you'll hear more of that Spanish surrealism influence entering in this book. The warmth of it and some darkness called your privacy, and cool windows, and some 100 feathers veiled in the hallway, and the long black hair combed straight before mass, and petals from the bent tips of the flowering trees, dust from the munificent road, and the itchy scalp of grass worth smelling. Shirts without ribs and tugging skirts, and the fist of corn smashed into the angel of the stove, singed and confused by love, like a rooster. The soil of hunger, the sleepy wall, disorganized lemons, organized oranges, birds, the arrival of the tablecloth, bubbling with oxygen, the slope towards the river, gambling blue. My eyes and the warmth of it, this vintage and this softness, and the lost wind molting. Poem 5 in this sequence, to Bert Myers. This and that, tomorrow with enormous eyes, very sure of themselves. Yesterday with its early start. Today, or what we called it then, oh, beautiful corpse. Portions of the soft evening itself rocking back and forth in its darkening porch. Fragments of the season, of the brook and the sunset, and the trees plummeting into the sky, and at last retrieved by the beak of a hummingbird, with relatives in London, sections of Christmas shared with illness, its mourning, for instance, or its running down the hill at full blast, or the sway of grass caressing the sensitive face of the sky. You have pinched their cheek, Grandma. You were there rummaging through the cupboards, and they in turn have veiled your face from sight. Quite gone, aren't you? Quite absent from the afternoon paper, the life even of its rubber band. Having eloped mysteriously with laughter. How well I recall. God, they even slapped your echoes from my smile, breaking my teeth with kindness. The loud shout of the tomatoes, the chilies, peanuts, and the onions can still be heard. Father has done well by them, but how the cashew tree will hound him. Number 6, to my father. Infancy of clay, honest as its breath, nativity, snow in the cotton of your touch. November, December, the wind out in the corridor. What a merchant! How long will he examine the chandelier? The peasant boys come down at last to talk about their sins. Cool mosaic, their mountain rises, a little of its violet, has made the river think. 20, 30. He's an old priest. The peasant girls come down at last to talk about their sins. A wood dove calls, what is the use of moss, if not to mute their love? Do not hurt so. Do not hide and hide and hide. My father has a little donkey that shakes its head and cries, that shakes its head and cries. I will not hurt again. I will not hide and hide. I'll come and hold your hand and talk and talk and talk. Poem 12, to Tom McGrath and Alan Swallow. Belgium in the moonlight, it's 1 inch first under this phase, and then again that other. Holland, underwater, its bullion cube, a diffuse leviathan. Tibet, the Philippines, both terraced like the rice fields of my thumb. I'll confess to the book, my fingers like nobody's shoes, chasing the lavender ice cube of surprise. Kind library, fledgling father, cello autumn cork, wisteria key, in a bull ring of opening remarks, the relation of peacocks to their necks, the fitting of dead autumn in its coffin, that proud cello with a streak of gout. Isn't it important to bleed? I am somehow slender and beautiful, said one of the coffee cans, beyond reach. I am somehow predestined to bite your leg and rush upstairs. Well, if you feel that way about Indians, you can peek, but I warn you, Christmas will never be the same after this. I think it was south you ran into the market, and the coffee broke your nose in half, and the Congress of Colors passed another law prohibiting the use of less than 1 million eyes to ever see a flower. Sure enough, there were riots and demonstrations, news vendors and diminutive, small, little, tiny bootblacks, swearing with classical severity, swarmed out of teeming cauldrons of soup, fighting alongside pig's feet, bluebells, greasy coins, and the fine-toothed comb of a cross-eyed rooster, all for the sake of their private lily. If you ever get the chance, listen to metal scoops plunge into gunny sacks of grain. It's a rich, diving sound. Boll weevils scurry to greater depths. When this occurs, they become widows and widowers, that simply. So I want to give you a couple shorter poems now from his very first book, The Gathering Wave. This is going to return to that earlier sound of the Chinese poets that I talked about earlier. Looking at the moon, suddenly remembering to look at the moon. And these are indeed haikus. The soil is so black and the leaf so very green that the bloom is red. Tangerines, music, a great many memories, and a few children. She could no longer keep her 2 feet on the ground, ringing that school bell. The gathering wave, sandpipers venturing in among the children. And I think I will close this evening with a poem from, a more recent poem from one of his more recent books, a collaborative book he did with the poet Gene Frumkin. They did this in various sections, and this is one of Alvaro's sections. And this is Sonatina in Praise of My Two Bulldogs. Today in Amsterdam, I see dogs in lawns and parks, dogs on leashes, others so well trained, they follow their masters through the busy streets. At each encounter, I recall the pools of silence in your eyes, that equity beyond the law, heads cocked at attention or buried in your mistress's lap, expecting that we stay the planet when you wake at night, unhappy with the howling of coyotes. In my grandmother's patio, you could have sniffed the turtle that crawled backwards into the human shout. The wind blows foreign dust into your eyes, but I'll be back. Nobody has gone beyond the fringes of existence yet. You are my household gods, boiling at my feet. Even now, even half a world away, I am collecting odors, your snouts pressed hard against the gift of smell. So those are a few poems, a brief sampling of the vast body of work of the poet Alvaro Cardona-Hine. I read from The Curvature of the Earth, The Gathering Wave, The Flesh of Utopia, A Garden of Sound, and Words on Paper. I hope you seek his work out. It's rich and deep and full of light. Thank you so much for joining Bootsy and me for another episode of A Great Barn Rising.